The phosphorescent clouds of the Atara Nebula pressed against the observation ports like something alive, writhing in shades of violet and electric blue that no human had possessed words for until they'd actually seen them. Eli Marson had been staring at those clouds for 8 months now, and they still made him feel like he was working inside a dream someone else was having. The environmental stabilizer chirped at him, an actual chirp, like a bird made of mathematics, and he sighed, adjusting the quantum resonance calibrator for the 3rd time in an hour. The Korvathi didn't build their technology so much as grow it, coaxing machines into existence from crystalline matrices that responded to thought as much as touch. After 8 months, Eli could use the equipment competently. Understanding it was another matter entirely. "Come on, you temperamental little miracle," he muttered, watching the holographic readout spiral through data patterns that resembled musical notation more than engineering schematics. "We've been through this. The gravity plating in Section 7 needs a 23% boost, not a concert in the key of blue." The stabilizer chirped again, this time in what Eli swore was an offended tone. His translation earpiece crackled. "Marson, status report." That was Chief Engineer Velkier, whose voice always sounded like she was gargling gravel even through the translator's best efforts. "Almost there, Chief. Just convincing the stabilizer that gravity is supposed to pull down, not sideways. Sideways gravity is not a malfunction. That section houses the Vresh delegation. They prefer it." Eli blinked. "The fish people want sideways gravity." "They are not fish people. They are aquatic semi-corporeal beings from a high-pressure environment, and yes, they find perpendicular orientation more comfortable. Your species is so rigidly attached to your up and down." "Yeah, well, my species evolved on planets that had a clear opinion about which way was which." A sound came through that might have been Korvathi laughter. "Finish the calibration, and Marson, try not to break anything. The Veridian threshold is not rated for human chaos levels." The connection cut before he could defend humanity's honor. Eli returned his attention to the stabilizer, carefully adjusting the resonance field until the hologram finally stabilized into a pattern that looked almost orderly. The equipment hummed with satisfaction. He was sure of it now. These machines definitely had moods, and the gravitational readings for Section 7 normalized into their perpendicular configuration. "There," he said, patting the stabilizer's crystalline housing. "Was that so hard?" The maintenance platform he stood on was suspended 15 meters above the corridor floor, held in place by magnetic fields that Eli trusted slightly less than he trusted his ex-girlfriend's promises. The corridor itself was typical of Korvathi architecture, flowing lines that suggested the interior of a massive shell, walls that glowed with bioluminescent patterns, and a complete absence of right angles that made human spatial reasoning weep quietly in corners. He was packing his tools, each one carefully marked with human labels, because Korvathi tool organization followed a logic he'd given up trying to understand, when the alarm started. Not the gentle chiming that meant someone's coffee synthesizer was malfunctioning. The full shrieking klaxon that meant the universe had suddenly developed opinions about the ship's continued existence. The translation earpiece screamed in multiple languages simultaneously. Through the chaos, Eli caught something about spatial anomaly, emergency maneuvers, and a phrase that translated roughly as "hold onto your ancestors." The ship lurched. Eli had a moment to think that lurch was an inadequate word for what happened when several thousand tons of living starship decided to move sideways through space at velocities that made physics professors weep. His magnetic boots, which had been holding him securely to the platform, suddenly decided they'd had enough of this relationship. He went airborne. Time did that thing it does during catastrophes, stretching like taffy while his brain frantically calculated trajectories and probable landing sites. The maintenance platform receded. The corridor floor rushed up. Somewhere, his carefully organized tools were scattering like metallic confetti, and he had a hysterical thought that Chief Velkir was going to kill him for losing the quantum spanner. Then the corridor did something impossible. It twisted, gravity fluctuating wildly, as the ship's compensators struggled to maintain stable orientation. Eli found himself tumbling through the air like laundry in a dryer, completely disoriented. His inner ear sending distress signals his brain was too busy panicking to process. He saw someone round the corner ahead, moving fast, their form a blur of dark clothing and purpose. Saw them register his presence too late. Saw their eyes widen, startling amber eyes that seemed to generate their own light. The collision was spectacular. They hit each other with enough force to knock the breath from Eli's lungs, became a tangle of limbs and momentum, slid across the floor in a graceful arc that would have been beautiful if it weren't so violent, slammed into the curved wall with an impact that Eli felt in his teeth. For a moment, there was only the sound of the alarms and his own labored breathing. Then he registered that he was lying on top of someone, that something sharp was digging into his ribs, and that several pieces of what looked like expensive equipment were scattered around them like the aftermath of a very aggressive garage sale. "Oh God," Eli gasped. "Oh God, I'm sorry, I didn't. Are you?" He pushed himself up, trying to extract himself from the tangle. His hand landed on something smooth and warm that cracked under his weight. The sound it made was wrong, not the snap of breaking, but something more like a sigh, like disappointment given audio form. The person beneath him hadn't moved. For a heart-stopping moment, Eli was convinced he'd killed someone. Then those amber eyes opened, staring up at him with an expression that cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been horror. She was Korvathi. That much was obvious from the elegant bone structure, and the long, pointed ears that were currently pressed flat against her skull in what Eli's cultural training suggested was either fear or shock. Her dark hair had come loose from its intricate braiding, falling across her face in disarray. She wore a form-fitting bodysuit beneath what had been armor that was now in pieces around them, its surface shot through with veins of silver that pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. "Are you hurt?" Eli asked desperately. "Please tell me you're not hurt. Chief Velkir is already going to kill me for the tools. I really can't add manslaughter to today's list." The woman slowly sat up, forcing Eli to scramble backward. Her movements were careful, controlled, as if she was checking each joint for damage. Around them, other Korvathi had begun to emerge from nearby corridors, drawn by the commotion. The alarms had stopped, leaving a silence that felt somehow worse. She reached out and picked up one of the broken armor pieces, turned it over in her hands. The silver veins flickered once, twice, then went dark. When she looked up at him, her face was unreadable, a careful mask that Eli's 8 months of cultural training couldn't penetrate. "Do you know what this means?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried perfectly in the sudden stillness. The accent was there, that musical quality all Korvathi voices had, but her English was flawless, each word precisely placed. Eli, still on his knees amid the wreckage of what he was increasingly sure was something important, could only shake his head. His heart was hammering, his hands were shaking, and every instinct he had was screaming that he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. The woman's amber eyes fixed on his face, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. Around them, the gathered Korvathi stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to something that looked disturbingly like awe. The broken armor lay between them like a shattered promise, its dying light casting shadows that seemed too dark for the glowing corridor. And in that moment, Eli Marson realized that gravity wasn't the only thing that could pull you in unexpected directions. The woman's name was Kael'thas Varen, and she had very strong opinions about helping Eli to his feet. "I can manage," she said, waving away his outstretched hand with a gesture that somehow conveyed both dismissal and weary patience. She rose in a single fluid motion that made Eli's own aching joints jealous, brushing fragments of armor from her bodysuit with careful precision. as if each piece still mattered despite being thoroughly destroyed. The crowd of onlookers hadn't dispersed. If anything, more Corvathi had materialized, filling the corridor with their tall, elegant forms and those disconcerting amber eyes that all seemed fixed on Eli with varying degrees of interest. He felt like an exhibit in a museum dedicated to catastrophic accidents. "So," Eli ventured, his voice cracking slightly, "on a scale of mildly inconvenient to jettisoned out the nearest airlock, how much trouble am I in?" Kael'thas paused in her collection of armor fragments, one eyebrow rising in an expression that translated perfectly across species barriers. "Really? That depends," she said slowly, "on whether you consider binding your fate to a stranger's for an indeterminate period to be trouble." "I'm sorry, what?" Before she could elaborate, the crowd parted with a deference that suggested someone important was approaching. Captain Thuron emerged from the press of bodies like a warship cutting through fog, tall even by Corvathi standards, his ceremonial robes marked with symbols that Eli's cultural training identified as combat honors. Lots of combat honors, possibly more combat honors than was strictly reasonable for someone in charge of a research vessel. "Kael'thas," the captain said, his voice carrying the kind of gravitas usually reserved for funeral orations. "Are you injured?" "No, Captain. The human cushioned my fall quite effectively." Eli wasn't sure if that was a joke. Her tone suggested it might be a joke. The captain's expression suggested he wasn't finding it funny. "And the Kethara?" Kael'thas held up a piece of the broken armor. In the corridor's bioluminescent light, Eli could see the intricate engravings covering its surface, patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, like optical illusions rendered in precious metal and stone. "Irreparable, the bioresonance matrix has collapsed." The captain's ears flattened against his skull, a gesture Eli had learned meant distress or displeasure. Around them, the gathered Corvathi began speaking in hushed tones, their voices creating a susurrus of sound that the translation earpiece couldn't parse into individual words. "Captain," Eli said, because someone had to say something and apparently it was going to be him, "I take full responsibility for the accident. Whatever compensation or disciplinary action is appropriate, I'll accept it. Just, please tell me I didn't destroy something irreplaceable." The silence that followed suggested he had definitely destroyed something irreplaceable. "Marson," Captain Thuron said, and the fact that he used Eli's surname felt ominous. "Come with us. This conversation requires privacy and possibly furniture designed for your species' limited spinal flexibility." That was definitely not a good sign. The conference chamber they were escorted to was smaller than Eli expected, but no less alien. Walls that curved like the interior of a nautilus shell, their surfaces shifting through subtle patterns of blue and silver that he'd learned indicated privacy mode. The furniture accommodated both human and Corvathi physiology through some clever engineering that Eli was too anxious to appreciate. Kael'thas arranged the broken armor pieces on the conference table with ritualistic care, each fragment placed in relation to the others, as if reconstructing a three-dimensional puzzle. Without the armor, she looked younger, perhaps equivalent to her late 20s by human standards, and there was a vulnerability to her movements that the armor's presence had concealed. Captain Thuron settled into a chair that adjusted itself to his frame with organic fluidity. He studied Eli for a long moment, his expression cycling through what might have been frustration, amusement, and resignation. "Do you know what a Kethara is, Marson?" "Ceremonial armor," Eli ventured, "important to your culture, something I definitely shouldn't have broken." "The Kethara is not merely armor," Kael'thas interjected, her voice carrying tones of someone explaining advanced physics to a particularly slow child. "It is a living artifact, grown over years from crystalline organisms that exist in quantum superposition. Each one is bonded to its wearer through bioresonance, a connection that links the armor's structure to the bearer's neural patterns and genetic signature." So it's alive. Both alive and not alive, she corrected. Quantum biology is complicated. The relevant point is that each Kethara is unique, irreplaceable, and carries the accumulated honor of its wearer's entire lineage. This one, she gestured to the broken pieces, has been passed through 17 generations of my clan. Eli felt his stomach drop. 17 generations. Give or take a century. I destroyed 17 generations of family history. Technically, you shattered the physical matrix. The honor damage is more metaphysical. Captain Thuron made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Kael'thas, you're not helping. I'm establishing context. You're terrifying the human. He broke my armor. Some terror seems appropriate. Eli looked between them, trying to determine if this was banter or genuine hostility. The cultural training modules hadn't covered how to tell if aliens are joking while discussing your impending doom. Captain, he said carefully, what exactly does breaking the armor mean? Because Kael'thas mentioned something about binding fates, and I really need to know if that was metaphorical or if I've accidentally gotten married by your customs. The captain's ears twitched. Amusement, Eli thought. Not marriage, though the binding is equally complex. When a Kethara is shattered, Korvathi tradition invokes the right of shared fate. The one who breaks the armor must stand as the wearer's shield companion during their next trial, sharing their honor, danger, and destiny until the debt is paid. Their next trial, Eli repeated slowly. Which would be, what exactly, a test, an exam, please tell me it's an exam. Kael'thas finally looked at him directly, her amber eyes unreadable. My clan has been challenged by a rival house over territorial rights. The dispute will be settled through the trial of 7 gates, a series of challenges testing wisdom, courage, honor, adaptability, sacrifice, unity, and vision. With my armor destroyed, I was planning to forfeit. But now, the captain continued, with you accidentally bound by tradition, she has another option. Let me guess, Eli said. Face the trial with me as her shield companion, despite the fact that I'm a human who knows absolutely nothing about your combat traditions, and whose greatest achievement today was not dying when I fell off a maintenance platform. Essentially, yes. And if she forfeits, she brings dishonor to her house and loses standing in Korvathi society, Kael'thas said flatly. Given that I'm also the ship's senior xenobiologist and our leading expert on the spatial anomalies threatening this sector, the political ramifications could be significant. Eli's brain was trying to process too much information at once. Wait, what spatial anomalies? The captain pulled up a holographic display that materialized above the table like crystallized starlight. It showed a 3-dimensional map of local space, dotted with pulsing red indicators that looked distressingly like a rash spreading across reality itself. These anomalies have been increasing in frequency and intensity, the captain explained. Tiers in space-time that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. Kael'thas's research is the closest we've come to understanding them, let alone stopping them. And if she's disgraced, Eli said, following the logic to its uncomfortable conclusion, her research gets dismissed. Nobody takes it seriously. Politics and science make uncomfortable bedfellows, Kael'thas said. But yes. Eli looked at the broken armor, then at Kael'thas, then at the map showing reality literally tearing itself apart. How long do I have to decide? The ritual cannot compel you, Captain Thuron said. You're not Korvathi. But a decision should be made soon. How soon is soon? The trial begins in 14 ship days. 14 days to learn an entire culture's combat traditions, face 7 impossible challenges, and prevent a political catastrophe that could doom critical research into the thing that might destroy us all. Eli laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. You know, when I volunteered for this exchange program, they promised it would be a learning experience. Are you always this flippant when confronting existential terror? Kael'thas asked. It's a coping mechanism. My therapist back on Earth said it was healthier than my previous approach, which involved screaming into pillows. Your species is very strange, says the woman whose armor was alive and dead simultaneously. Something shifted in Kael'thas's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that suggested she might not completely hate him. Fair point. Captain Thuron stood, his robes settling around him with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd practiced the movement. I'll leave you two to discuss this. Kael'thas, you know where to find me when you've decided. Marson, he paused at the doorway, try not to break anything else before then. After he left, the silence stretched between them like something physical. Kael'thas gathered the armor pieces with careful reverence, her long fingers tracing the dead engravings. You don't have to do this, she said finally. Whatever debt you think you owe. How much danger are we talking about? Eli interrupted. The trial, honestly. She met his eyes. People have died in the trial of 7 gates, not often but it happens, and our opponents. She trailed off, shaking her head. They won't make it easy, but you think we could win. I think, she said carefully, that the universe has a sense of humor, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships are the ones that matter most. She stood, cradling the broken armor. Think about it. I've grown rather attached to both my ears, and I'd prefer not to lose one because my shield companion tripped over his own feet during the Gate of Courage. It took Eli a moment to realize she was joking. By the time he did, she was already at the doorway, pausing just long enough to look back. The bioluminescent walls cast her features in blue shadow, making her look like something from ancient mythology. Tomorrow, she said. Tell me tomorrow. Either way, at least we'll have a good story. Eli found Kael'thas the next morning, in what the ship's directory optimistically called a gymnasium, but which looked more like someone had asked a fever dream to design an obstacle course. The space reconfigured itself as he watched. Gravity plates rotating sections of floor into walls, holographic barriers materializing and dissolving, and somewhere in the distance, something was making a sound like wind chimes having an argument. Kael'thas stood in the center of it all, moving through a series of forms that flowed like water finding new paths. Without her armor, she wore a simple training suit that adapted to her movements, and her ears swiveled independently as she tracked threats from multiple directions. She spun, dropped, rolled through a space that shouldn't have existed, and came up holding a practice weapon that hummed with barely contained energy. You're early, she said without looking at him. I thought humans required more sleep than this. Couldn't sleep, Eli admitted. Kept thinking about how I've somehow managed to go from fixing air conditioning to potentially dying in ritual combat. Environmental stabilizers are considerably more complex than air conditioning. Really? Because I've been on the ship for 8 months, and I've seen gravity do things that would make Newton weep. Something that might have been approval flickered across her face. Then we should begin. We have 13 days to turn you into something that won't immediately embarrass my entire lineage. She gestured, and a section of the gymnasium reconfigured itself into a relatively flat platform. First lesson. Korvathi combat philosophy. Is there going to be a test? The trial is the test. This is the cramming session where you pray to your gods that osmosis is real. Eli stepped onto the platform, trying not to notice how it felt slightly unstable under his feet, as if the floor was considering its options. So what's the philosophy? Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. That's a human martial arts film from your 20th century. I watched it during cultural orientation. The philosophy is terrible. You watched 80s movies for cultural orientation. The instructors believed they were documentaries. She moved to stand across from him, her posture relaxed but ready. Korvathi combat is about reading patterns and adapting to them. Your opponent is a system of probabilities. Every movement suggests the next. Every choice narrows their options. So it's like chess. If chess involved significantly more risk of concussion, yes. She demonstrated, moving through a sequence that looked deceptively simple: a step, a turn, a shift of weight. Notice how each position flows into the next. I'm not forcing the movement, I'm allowing it. The key is. Eli tried to replicate her stance, and immediately discovered that human joints had opinions about angles that Corvathi joints apparently didn't. He wobbled, overcorrected, and ended up in a position that was neither graceful nor threatening. The key is not falling over, Kael'thas finished, watching him with what he chose to interpret as patience rather than pity. Perhaps we start with something more fundamental. Can you stand on one leg? I can stand on one leg. I'm not great at it, but I can do it. Demonstrate. Eli lifted his right foot off the ground, maintained his balance for approximately 3 seconds. Then the gymnasium's gravity plate decided to rotate 15 degrees, and he toppled sideways into a holographic barrier that felt distressingly solid. Kael'thas made a sound that definitely wasn't a laugh but seemed related to the concept. The gymnasium adapts to challenge the user. It sensed your stability and adjusted accordingly. Your training equipment is actively trying to murder me. Murder is such a strong word. Educate through controlled adversity is more accurate. I'm going to die in 13 days. Probably not. The first gate usually isn't fatal. She offered him a hand up, her grip stronger than he expected. Again, this time expect the environment to betray you. It builds better reflexes. They spent the next hour with Eli learning to stand, walk, and occasionally successfully complete a turn, without the gymnasium's intervention reducing him to a flailing disaster. Kael'thas proved to be a patient teacher, though her patience had a quality of scientific curiosity to it. She watched his failures with the same interest she might apply to an unusual specimen. Your center of gravity is all wrong, she observed after his 7th fall. Humans carry too much mass in your upper body. It makes you top-heavy. I'll be sure to redistribute my internal organs. Eli gasped from the floor. Should only take a few million years of evolution. Or you could bend your knees more. Oh, that's significantly faster. By the time she called a break, Eli had managed to complete an entire sequence without falling, which felt like a victory, until he realized the sequence was probably what Corvathi children learned in their equivalent of kindergarten. They sat at the edge of the training area, and Kael'thas produced water containers that adjusted their temperature based on who was holding them. Tell me about the trial, Eli said after draining half his container. What are we actually up against? Kael'thas's ears angled backward slightly, uncertainty or concern. The trial of 7 gates tests different virtues. The specific challenges are designed by a neutral council and kept secret, but they follow certain patterns. Physical challenges, intellectual puzzles, moral dilemmas. Competitors can face them individually or as pairs. And we're a pair. You'll take 3 gates, I'll take 3, and we'll face the 7th together. The pairing strategy is crucial. We need to match our strengths to the appropriate gates. My strengths being what exactly? Advanced falling techniques. You fixed the environmental stabilizers yesterday. That requires spatial reasoning and systems thinking. The gate of wisdom might suit you. Might. The gate adapts to the competitors. It won't be a simple engineering problem. Eli processed this, and our opponents. The House of Crimson Threshold will likely send war singer Gerald and her shield companion. Gerald is formidable. She's won 2 previous trials and considers herself a guardian of pure Corvathi tradition. She views integration with other species as contamination. So she's going to love me. She's going to try to destroy you, yes, but within the rules. The trial has strict protocols. Kael'thas rolled her shoulders, a gesture that seemed to release tension. There's something else you should know. The trial isn't just about my honor or my house's standing. The research, Eli said, the spatial anomalies. She pulled up a holographic display from a device on her wrist. The image showed the same map the captain had displayed, but with additional data layers that made Eli's head hurt. They're not random. The anomalies are following a pattern. converging on a point in uncharted space. Something is tearing through from somewhere else. Something like what? Old Korvathi legends speak of void singers, entities that exist outside normal space-time. They don't destroy through force. They unravel the fundamental interactions that hold matter together. She manipulated the display, showing probability curves that spiked into terrifying peaks. If my calculations are correct, we have maybe 4 months before a breach occurs. When it does, every inhabited system in this sector is at risk. And nobody's taking it seriously. Some are, but I need more than belief. I need resources, cooperation across clan lines, access to restricted archives that might contain information about ancient countermeasures, all of which requires political capital I currently lack because my armor is in 17 pieces. The weight of it settled over Eli like a physical thing, so if we fail the trial, I lose standing. My research is dismissed as the desperate theories of a disgraced scholar, and we potentially lose our only chance to stop something that could unravel reality itself. She deactivated the display, but no pressure. You keep using that phrase. I'm starting to think it's become ironic. Language is fascinating that way. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the gymnasium cycle through training configurations. Somewhere in the distance, Eli could hear other crew members going about their duties, the ship humming with its organic life, the universe continuing its rotation with complete indifference to the small dramas of the beings living in it. Why me? Eli asked finally. I mean, really. The universe had to arrange for me to fall off that platform at exactly the right moment to crash into you. It had to time the spatial anomaly to make the ship lurch. It had to make you volunteer for an exchange program that brought you across the galaxy in the first place, Kael'thas finished. I've thought about it too. The probability cascade is improbable. So either we're cosmically unlucky, or something wanted us to collide. I prefer to think we're lucky. Unlucky would be if you'd crashed into someone less patient. She stood, offering him a hand up again. Come. We have 12 more days, and you still fall over when the gravity hiccups. Tomorrow we work on the gate of courage simulations. Try not to strain anything important. Quick question, what counts as important? Everything above the neck, most things below it. Actually, just try not to strain anything at all. That's much clearer, thank you. She was already moving back toward the training area, her form casting long shadows in the gymnasium's adaptive lighting. Eli followed, his legs protesting every step, his mind racing with probability calculations and ancient legends, and the growing certainty that he'd stumbled into something far larger than himself. The gymnasium reconfigured around them, gravity plates spinning into new orientations, and Eli prepared to fall again. But this time, when the floor betrayed him, he almost managed to catch himself. Almost. The Viridian threshold descended through Kethris Prime's atmosphere on the 11th day, and Eli pressed his face against the observation port like a child seeing snow for the first time. The planet spread below them in geometries that seemed impossible, crystalline towers that grew from the landscape rather than being built upon it, cities that flowed with the terrain instead of dominating it, and skies that shimmered with auroras generated by magnetic fields that sang in frequencies just beyond human hearing. It's beautiful, he said, because sometimes the simple words were the only honest ones. Kael'thas stood beside him, her reflection ghostly in the transparent material. Wait until you see it from the ground. The architecture resonates with the planet's magnetic core. At dawn and dusk, the entire city becomes an instrument. Your people built cities that are also musical instruments. We didn't build them. We encouraged them to grow in ways that complemented their natural harmonics. There's a difference. Right, obviously. That's a completely normal distinction. She'd been teaching him Korvathi for the past week. Basic phrases, cultural protocols, the elaborate system of gestures that accompanied formal greetings. His pronunciation was apparently atrocious, but she insisted he try anyway. Something about effort mattering more than perfection, which seemed suspiciously like she was managing his expectations. The landing was smooth, the ship settling into a docking cradle that adjusted itself organically to accommodate the vessel's dimensions. Through the port, Eli could see welcoming parties assembling, Corvathi in formal attire that put his hastily issued ceremonial clothes to shame. "Your family?" he asked, noting a group that stood slightly apart from the others. "My family," Kael'thas confirmed, her tone suggesting complicated feelings. "Try not to call my mother ma'am. She finds it diminishing. The proper form of address is Matriarch Celes, or just Matriarch if context makes it clear. And your father, Master Artificer Torin, he'll try to show you his workshop. Politely decline, unless you want to spend 6 hours learning about crystalline growth matrices. Is that not interesting? It's fascinating. But we have a trial to prepare for, and father loses track of time when he's explaining his work." They disembarked into air that tasted different, sweeter somehow, with undertones of ozone and something floral that Eli's earth-trained senses couldn't identify. The welcoming party approached with synchronized precision, and Eli tried to remember everything Kael'thas had taught him about proper greetings. Matriarch Celes was taller than her daughter, her bearing suggesting someone accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. She examined Eli with eyes that missed nothing, her expression carefully neutral. "So," she said in perfect English, "you are the human who destroyed 17 generations of our family's honor." Eli's prepared greeting evaporated. Yes, I'm very sorry about that." "Sorry?" The matriarch's ears twitched. "How very human. Do you apologize to the storm when it disrupts your plans? Do you say sorry to probability when it turns against you?" "Mother," Kael'thas interjected, "please don't traumatize him before the trial. We need him functional. I'm evaluating his resilience. If he can't survive a conversation with me, he certainly can't survive Gerald." Master Artificer Torin stepped forward then, his presence gentler than his partner's. "Welcome to Kethris Prime, Eli Marson. Kael'thas speaks highly of your adaptability, which is praise she doesn't offer lightly." "She also mentioned I fall down a lot," Eli said, because apparently his mouth had decided honesty was the best policy. "Falling is just aggressive learning," a new voice chimed in. A younger Corvathi bounced forward with energy that seemed barely contained. "I'm Rin, Kael'thas' sibling. You're making history happen and I'm documenting everything." "Rin studies historical patterns," Kael'thas explained with the weary tone of an older sibling who'd had this conversation many times. "They're writing their thesis on cultural adaptation through unexpected events. And you're the most unexpected event in 3 centuries. Rin produced a recording device that looked like liquid metal holding its shape through force of will. Quick question, when you broke the armor, were you aware of the symbolic implications or was it pure accident?" "Pure accident," Eli confirmed. "Very, very pure accident." "Excellent, the best history is unintentional." The family compound turned out to be built into and around a massive crystalline formation that hummed with barely audible harmonics. Inside, the architecture followed the same organic principles as the ship, flowing spaces that seemed to shift purpose based on need, walls that glowed with gentle bioluminescence, and a complete absence of corners that made Eli's Euclidean instincts quietly protest. Dinner was an exercise in cultural navigation. The food was beautiful but utterly alien. Eli could identify textures but not sources, flavors that his taste buds interpreted as probably plant-based, and definitely not anything Earth has words for. He managed to avoid major protocol violations, though he suspected using the wrong utensil for the 3rd course was noticed even if it wasn't mentioned. "Tell me, Marson," the matriarch said during what Eli hoped was dessert, "what does your family think of you binding yourself to our daughter's fate?" "They don't know yet," Eli admitted. "Communication lag is about 2 weeks. By the time my message reaches Earth, the trial will be over. And if you survive, what then? You return to your environmental stabilizers. It was a good question. Eli had been avoiding thinking about it. I suppose that depends on whether Kael'thas decides I'm more useful as an engineer or as someone who falls down dramatically at crucial moments. Kael'thas made a sound that might have been a laugh. The falling has improved. Now he only collapses when gravity does something unexpected. Your gravity is always doing something unexpected, Eli protested. That's practically its defining feature. Rin, who'd been quietly recording everything, leaned forward with barely contained excitement. Speaking of unexpected, have either of you considered the implications of a successful trial? A human as shield companion would legitimize the House of Distant Storms integration philosophy. You'd essentially become a walking political statement. I prefer to think of myself as a stumbling political statement, Eli said. More accurate. After dinner, the matriarch insisted on showing Eli the armor gallery, a chamber where previous Cathara were displayed, each one representing a different generation of the family line. The armor pieces stood in stasis fields that preserved them perfectly, their surfaces still showing the faint glow of dormant bioresonance. Each one tells a story, Celie said, her voice softer than it had been during dinner. Battles won and lost, discoveries made, children born. Every significant moment of the wearer's life becomes encoded in the crystalline structure. She stopped before an empty pedestal at the end of the gallery. This is where Kael'thas's Cathara would have rested when she passed it to the next generation. I really am sorry, Eli said quietly. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I understand what was lost. The matriarch turned to face him, her amber eyes studying his features. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Marson? I see someone who fell from the sky and shattered something precious. But I also see someone who stood up afterward and accepted the consequences instead of running. She paused, her ears angling forward slightly. Attention, focus. My daughter needs someone who will stand up after falling. The trial will knock you both down repeatedly. What matters is whether you rise together. Before Eli could respond, alarms began shrieking through the compound. Not the emergency klaxons from the ship, but something deeper, more resonant. Kael'thas appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. The councils released the trial configuration, she said. We need to see this. The holographic display in the family's strategy room showed 7 gates arranged in a pattern that made Eli's head hurt. They existed in normal space, but also seemed to occupy additional dimensions that his three-dimensional thinking couldn't fully process. Each gate pulsed with different energy signatures, and the challenge descriptions scrolled past in Korvathi script too fast for Eli to translate. Wisdom gate first, Kael'thas said, manipulating the display. That's good for you. Then courage, which I'll take. Honor is neutral ground, could go either way. Adaptability for you, sacrifice for me, unity we share, and vision. She trailed off, her ears flattening. What's wrong with vision? Eli asked. Vision gate requires quantum perception, the ability to see probability branches and choose between them. It's the hardest gate, reserved for the final challenge. She looked at him, something like apology in her expression. Most shield companions fail there. The human neurological structure isn't designed for quantum observation. But we knew this wouldn't be easy. There's not easy, and there's neurologically impossible. I don't want you to. Kael'thas, Eli interrupted gently. I fell off a maintenance platform and accidentally triggered an ancient ritual that bound me to a cosmic-scale political crisis. Impossible left the building a long time ago. We'll figure it out. She stared at him for a long moment, then something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You know what the strangest part of this is? I actually believe we might. Rin appeared then, still carrying the recording device. This is perfect. The odds were against you from the start, which means if you win, it's a better story. If you lose, it's a tragic story. Either way, my thesis writes itself. Rin, Kael'thas said with infinite patience, you're not helping. I'm documenting That's different from helping. Later, Eli stood on a balcony overlooking the crystalline city, watching the twin moons rise and paint everything in shades of silver and blue. The auroras danced overhead, and he could almost hear the harmonics the architecture produced, frequencies that made his bones resonate in ways that were deeply strange and somehow right. Kael'thas joined him, moving silently despite the resonant floor. Nervous, she asked. Terrified, Eli admitted. But also excited. Is that wrong? It's human, which seems to be its own category of experience. She was quiet for a moment, her ears angled toward the auroras. Thank you for this, for standing when you could have walked away. Where would I go? Back to fixing environmental stabilizers. Back to a life where I knew exactly how every day would unfold. He turned to face her, the moonlight making her features seem carved from alabaster. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a reason to be more than functional. Her expression softened in ways he'd learned to recognize over their training. Tomorrow, we show them what happens when tradition collides with the unexpected, when adaptation becomes its own form of strength. And if I fail the vision gate, then we fail together. That's what shield companions do. The city sang around them, crystalline towers resonating with magnetic fields, and Eli felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty, but its close cousin, purpose. He'd come to the stars running from predictability and found something infinitely more complicated. Found someone who saw his falling not as weakness, but as the first motion of rising. The trial starts at dawn, Kael'thas said softly. Try to sleep. Will you? Probably not, but I'll pretend convincingly. That's very reassuring. She actually smiled then, brief but genuine. Get some rest, Eli Marson. Tomorrow, we give the universe something to pay attention to. And standing there beneath alien stars, bound by accident or fate, or the universe's strange sense of humor, to a warrior scientist from a civilization that grew cities like gardens, Eli thought. Maybe falling was just another word for landing somewhere unexpected. Maybe breaking something was how you found out what you were really meant to build.